Chapter 32. The next morning, Kessa rubbed the sleep out of her eyes and rolled out of bed. Dr. Finesse was gone, probably socializing in the meal tent. Splashing some water from the wash basin on her face, the 17-year-old tried hard to shake the feeling of sheer exhaustion. Thank Athalos she didn't have to wrestle today. Lifting her nightgown, she removed the bandages and examined her laceration, impressed with how much it had healed already. Applying more of the poultice Hayland had insisted she take with her, she grimaced, her wound scolding her for being too rough. After rebandaging it, she stood up, her nightgown falling to her ankles. "I brought you some breakfast," Dr. Finesse said, entering the tent with a plateful of food. "Though, given how much you ate last night, when we got back, I doubted you'd be able to fit more food in." Flashing her a devil-may-care grin, Kessa asked, "Really? You doubted?" Grinning back, Charlo handed her the plate. "No, not really." Watching Kessa gobble the first few bites, Charlo casually mentioned the everyday gossip that was humming. Kessa listened more intently than usual, hoping to hear the one tidbit of news she was acutely interested in. When she didn't hear it, her shoulders slumped, and worry furrowed her brow. The mistress of Mud sat down at their makeshift vanity, grasped her hairbrush, and guided it gently through her pink hair in a soothing gesture. "There was one bit of unsettling news." "Oh?" "Sheila, the blue-haired girl who served the royal dais?" "I know the one." Kessa feigned a laid-back curiosity. This was the news she was itching to hear. "She's missing. They searched high and low, both here in camp and at her house. She's just vanished." "Run off with a lover, possibly?" "Unlikely. Her brother was found dead early this morning in his jail cell." "That's terrible." "Hung himself." Kessa bowed her head in remorse. While she was relieved her plan had been successful, she still felt ill about Sykes's fate, even if it was the end he'd planned for an innocent man. "With Sheila missing, they just threw him in an unmarked grave." Finesse frowned. "If she's found, she can request a headstone, but for now, he's nameless. It's really very tragic." Placing the hairbrush noiselessly on the vanity, Charlo professed, "I fear for Sheila. If she'd found out about her brother's suicide, it might have led to her own. They had no other family." "Did you know them?" Kessa asked, wishing she could alleviate the doctor's angst with the truth. Charlo shook her head. "Not very many people did, other than several service projects they kept to themselves. Shadow do-gooders, it seems." "Tragic feels like an understatement," Kessa muttered. "Indeed." The spy was fully cognizant that the unmarked grave might be because when the body was found, they realized it wasn't Tarnick. But with his sister missing and not wanting to rile the people of Fervor, they buried him anyway without a fuss. She'd hoped for that outcome. Their prisoner swapping places with a stranger that ended up dead right under their noses certainly wouldn't look good on police records. Then again, maybe they hadn't noticed the error, not knowing how thorough the authorities were or how secretive of their mistakes. She could only speculate. Either way, she'd hoped the corpse's identity wouldn't be revealed, and it hadn't been. Her plan had gone smoothly. It was a win she was willing to accept, albeit with a bitter taste in her mouth. Dr. Green pulled some weeds out of his parsley plant's pot. He enjoyed spending his free time in his herb garden. The day had been busy because there was no mud wrestling and patients had flooded his clinic. Glancing a reflected figure in the greenhouse glass, he jumped, startled. Turning, he beheld a hooded person standing only a few meters away. Whoever it was didn't appear to be threatening, despite the hood. "I apologize for startling you," a deep, feminine voice professed. "I mean you no harm." Green's shoulders relaxed a little. "What do you want?" "Your friend, Lord Aegeon, is in danger." "Oh? How so?" Cautiously taking a couple steps toward him, Kessa, who was hidden under her hood, placed her hand on his arm, hoping this would impress him with the importance of her message. Hayland Green was intelligent and caring. She believed him trustworthy, but would he take her seriously? There was little evidence of the plot she was about to convey, and the message being delivered by a hooded stranger hindered reliability. All that aside, she wasn't aware of Green's loyalty to the king. Would he put his liege's will above his friend's life? Still, she had to try. "I discovered a plot involving some of the king's less savory lackeys. They conspired to have Lord Aegeon murdered on the dais during the competition. Fortunately, it was unsuccessful. But I have no doubt there will be another attempt." It was heavy news to hear. He wasn't sure what to think or how to react. "Who are you?" he asked. "I can't reveal my identity, but believe me when I say I am a friend to you and Lord Aegeon." "And you're inferring that the king is involved? But why? Pantheus is a good man and a good leader." "Good reasons for the king to want him dead, don't you think?" As Green considered her statement, his teal eyes hardened. Kessa could only guess why. Did he distrust what she was saying? Was he unhappy with her accusation of the king? Was he worried about his friend? Not wanting to drag this out, Kessa seized a sprig of parsley for the road and reiterated, "Tell your friend to be on his guard. The king wants him dead." With that, she left the greenhouse and its occupant to mull over her message in solitude. The next day, Kessa stomped her feet up and down in the mud while awaiting her opponent. The feeling of the muck squishing twixt her toes was soothing. She wasn't nervous about the match, just her wound. It was healing well, and she didn't want to tear the stitches and bleed during the competition. While she stood there fretting, she caught the king's glare. It was the type of glare that distracted from everything else. Did he know or suspect what she'd done? She'd noticed that Lord Aegeon was not present, nor was Dr. Green. This had been a relief to her because it probably meant that her warning had been heeded. Had the king heard about the hooded female who'd paid a visit to the greenhouse yesterday? Had he figured it all out, or was he merely in a bad mood? Try as she might to narrow down the source of that glare, there were just too many possibilities. A girl with blue hair stepped into the ring. She was muscular and sturdy, with plain features twisted into a mean expression. Her moniker was Torrent, and when it came to mud wrestling, she was certainly that. Kessa hadn't had an opportunity to speak personally with her. She wasn't the only one. Torrent wasn't known for her conversational skills or an approachable manner. Her lack of popularity was compensated by the amount of admiration she'd earned in the ring. She was a fierce, unrelenting competitor. "I've got your number, Akarin," Torrent spewed in true showmanship fashion. "The number of seconds it'll take me to pin you flat?" Kessa retorted. The girl grinned at her response and beckoned her over. The match was challenging, particularly with Kessa doing her best not to tear her wound. Several times, Torrent truly seemed to have her number, but by the skin of her teeth, Kessa emerged victorious, her stitches intact. Dr. Finesse was being pestered with some medical questions at the end of the match, so Kessa headed back to their tent alone. Along the way, a sackcloth was thrown over her head, and she was roughly escorted to an unknown destination. Once the sackcloth was removed, Kessa's gaze fell upon Cassius. His midnight blue hair was tied back, doing nothing to conceal his scowl. He wore an elegant black thigh-length tunic with blue silk lining and black tights. Fine leather knee boots finished the ensemble with a flourish, but nothing detracted from that scowl. A tremor of fear gripped her as she predicted the reason for this abduction. He knew what she'd done. He knew all about Sheila, Tarnick, Sykes, and the jailbreak. He probably knew that she'd warned Pantheus, too. If she was right, she wasn't leaving that tent alive. Nevertheless, she bowed dutifully. "You haven't forgotten my requirement, have you, kitten?" It only took her a moment to recall what he was talking about. Hiding her resentment, Kessa got down on all fours. "Better. Well, I'm waiting." "Sire?" She glanced at him curiously. "Forgive my ignorance." Draping his body overtop her like a cape, he whispered in her ear, "Where is my conspiracy?" Standing straight up again, he divulged, "You've exceeded my expectations, mud wrestling, but not spying. Where is my conspiracy?" "I have uncovered no conspiracies against you, Your Highness." "Impossible! The wrestling has distracted you from your true purpose here." Realizing that the king's sudden anxiety was probably due to Sykes's disappearance, Kessa hedged, "Has your Majesty sensed or encountered any threats?" Seeing his fury escalating, she quickly amended, "If His Majesty could share why he is concerned." "I'm not going to do your job for you." "Sire, I assure you the girls are concerned with mud wrestling, nothing else." "Certainly, that seems the case with you." "Believe me, Your Highness, your safety is my chief concern. I've heard nothing, seen nothing, traced nothing. If there is a plot against you, it isn't being planned where I can detect it." "So you say." Cassius pawed at his chin. "Perhaps. You haven't heard any conspiracies. Have you heard any chatter about me?" Kessa's mind raced while she considered not only what she'd heard, but also what was okay to tell. "A few of the girls wish to court His Majesty." That was putting it mildly. Cassius smoothed his hands over his hair, reminding Kessa of a cat preening, and said, "That's nothing new." The two men who'd escorted Kessa to the king's tent sniggered. She didn't recognize them, and yet she felt she knew their sort all too well. Sykes's sort. His type was a penny a dozen. "Anything else you wish to tell me before I send you on your way?" She paused, more for effect than time to think. There definitely wasn't anything else she wanted to tell the king, but she had to be careful it wasn't a trap. "No, Your Highness." "Then why are you still in my sight?" Kessa moved to leave the tent when Cassius added, "Oh, and kitten, you will throw the competition." Her mouth dropping open in protest, she spun around, prepared to argue. The king's expression stopped her in her tracks. "You're not here to win, remember?" Her lips squeezing tightly together, Kessa stifled her objection. She allowed the king's goons to throw the sackcloth back over her head and escort her back to where they'd grabbed her. Furious, she stomped back to her tent. Charlo looked at her curiously. He wants me to throw the competition, Kessa fumed. Instead of appearing surprised or confused, as one might expect, Charlo responded, "A foreigner has never won Mud Mania. I suppose he wants to keep it that way." She tilted her head to the side. "Or perhaps it's the attention he wants you to avoid." "I'm undefeated, Char. I already have a lot of attention." "Candy, I've worked so hard, and I'm good. I don't want to throw it all away. If I lose, I want it to be because someone's better than me, not because some king says I must. Just so his Mud Mania can remain untainted by a foreigner. Honestly, if you don't want a foreigner to win, you shouldn't allow one into the competition. I'm here because he demanded it. I didn't even want to come." Several nonverbal expressions of ire ensued. "It's not fair or right." Even more interjections of ire followed. All the while, Dr. Finesse sat calmly. Once the tantrum subsided, she asked, "Are you finished?" Kessa glared at her and collapsed onto the bed with a huff, but it was clear she was finished. "If the king has ordered you to throw the competition, then you must." Charlo drew close to Kessa and held her gaze profoundly. "Throw the competition, Candy Cane." Catching her meaning, Kessa's lips slid to the side in an unadulterated smirk. Throw the competition indeed. Literally. The final day of competition arrived much too quickly, in Kessa's opinion. The remaining 6 wrestlers and their standings were Candy Cane, Violet Crush, Torrent, Blue Dawn, Pinecone, and Clare. In Mud Mania's history, only 3 other competitors had held the title of undefeated. Kessa was proud of her first-place standing and her undefeated status. Violet Crush, Torrent, and Pinecone were the only competitors that had come close to beating her. That morning, while traveling to the competition, Charlo had warned that there was plenty a slip twixt a cup and a lip. Kessa had, with a wink, thanked her for voicing her confidence in Candy Cane. The crowd was massive. Had half of Renanin shown up? The vendors and their products seemed to have multiplied as well. They were holding nothing back, with piles of goodies and Mud Mania-themed merchandise. Kessa had smiled and nudged Charlo, observing how many vendors were selling candy canes. Charlo, her serious mane holding, promised to buy Kessa one if she was victorious. Then her serious mane cracked as she'd pointed out a stall filled with dolls resembling each competitor. When Kessa spotted a candy cane doll with yellow yarn for hair, blue buttons for eyes, and a red and white striped bodysuit with matching mask, her jaw dropped. The queue went on for several meters, filled with fans hoping to purchase a doll mock-up of their favorite competitor. When the merchant spotted the real Candy Cane walking by, he tossed her a doll and called out well wishes for her victory. Several fans in the queue had called out and waved to her too. In celebration of Mud Mania's conclusion, the king wore his royal regalia, including his jeweled scepter, crown, and belt. Despite herself, Kessa had felt a wave of approval and attraction when he first stepped onto the dais. He was, after all, a sight to behold. Apparently, the crowd had been dazzled too, as they cheered loudly as he moved to his seat. Shortly afterward, remembering that it was Cassius they'd cheered for, an unsettling feeling of guilt coated the crowd like a sticky film, and no one looked anyone in the eye for several seconds. So, even in Renanin, his home kingdom, he wasn't well liked. He had usurped his father, a king whom the people had loved, according to Charlo. After much fanfare, the excitement practically palpable, the mud wrestling finally commenced. Caked in mud that concealed the bruises and welts from her first match against Clare, Kessa sat on the bleachers reserved for the competitors and their coaches. If she was ever given the responsibility of awarding Clare a show name, she'd choose Vice Grip. She'd joked as much to Clare's face as they'd left the ring. Clare, a kind girl that Kessa got along well with outside the ring, had strained mud from her magenta hair and retorted that Candy Cane was too sweet a name, and that Persistence or Blonde Dodger would have been more apt. Kessa had giggled and sat down to watch Violet Crush square off against Pinecone. She noticed Hayland Green slip into his seat on the dais. Of course, he'd want to watch his wife compete on the final day. Kessa felt regret that Pantheus couldn't be there, but it was for the best. Seeing the end of Mud Mania wasn't worth his life. The match was intense. Pinecone understandably held nothing back. If she lost, she was finished. Violet Crush slammed Pinecone into the mud and pinned her there until a referee declared her the victor. As Pinecone slowly climbed to her feet, Kessa gasped at how dull her eyes appeared. It was like looking at dying embers that had once glowed fiercely. Seeing her concern, Charlo explained, "The Copperundish. Their eyes dull when they are upset or in pain. They're a very emotionally transparent race." Kessa nodded in comprehension. "They're wide-open books. If you want to read in a Karin or Renonian, you have to crack the spine." Enjoying her companion's analogy, Charlo said, "No wonder they don't trust us." Clare and Torrent stepped into the ring. Clare was skilled, but not enough to prevent the torrent washing over her. At the end of the match, Clare was eliminated, and Torrent's arm was raised by the referee. Dropping her arm, Torrent pointed at Candy Cane and screamed, "You're next, Karin." The crowd erupted at the jibe. Torrent smirked at the mixture of cheers and jeers as she stepped out of the ring. A member of the crowd called out, "Looks like you're all washed up, Candy Cane." Charlo leaned toward Kessa and said, "Well, at least we know how clever your critics are." "Nothing screams intelligence like wordplay and puns," Kessa stated playfully. "And here I thought Renonians were just colorful." Kessa stood up and glanced across the way to see Blue Dawn trouncing toward the ring. Her blue hair was secured in what looked like an excruciatingly tight bun, yanking at the skin of her face and neck. Instinctively, Kessa loosened her blonde locks and winced sympathetically. Although Blue Dawn put up the fight of her life, it wasn't enough to offset the inconveniences of her hairstyle. The bun was her downfall. It was a perfect handle, and Candy Cane gladly manipulated it to her advantage. At the conclusion of the match, Kessa was about to apologize for her unorthodox use of her opponent's hairdo when Blue Dawn, grinning sheepishly, congratulated her on her well-strategized win. Bowing respectfully, Kessa put her hand on Blue Dawn's shoulder and praised her fortitude and tenacity. It was an unpretentious interaction that touched the crowd enough for several awes and a heartfelt applause. There was a brief interlude while people stocked up on merchandise, food, and gossip, and the competitors caught their breath. Violet Crush rushed over to Kessa. "You're certainly on point today, Candy," she gushed, glancing over at her trainer, who was scowling, her hands on her hips. "Ugh!" Crush turned away to avoid the sight. "She's an amazing trainer, I'll admit, but I can't wait to be rid of her." Charlo chuckled and nudged her protégé. "Feel the same way, Kane?" "Of course," Kessa smiled, letting her phrase dangle before strongly adding, "Not." Her cheeks turning as pink as her hair, Charlo said, You're just saying that because you're stuck traveling all the way back to Cyrene with me. I'm against Torrent next. Violet looked meaningfully at Candy Cane and continued speaking with an uncharacteristic somberness. The winner will challenge you for the title of Mistress of Mud. Kessa swallowed edgily. Torrent stood only a couple meters away, pitilessly eyeing the two of them with an icy blue stare that froze their insides. She was a tough competitor that Kessa easily envisioned prevailing, and then celebrating over their dead bodies. An iceberg was an apt description of her person and her personality. She was pale and frigid. Her pale skin was tinged blue, as was her hair. It was styled in heaps that jutted from her head, much like icebergs jutted from the great water. She rarely spoke to anyone, and when she did, it was abrupt and often bordered on rude. Kessa realized that she'd never seen her smile, unless it was with sarcasm or malice. Watch her scissor kick. It's pretty powerful and will bind you up in seconds, and she'll use it to escape a pin. Violet Crush grinned. Noticed too? Of course you did. Good luck, Violet. Thank you. To you as well. Violet Crush and Torrent crashed in an epic battle that was sure to go down in the annals of mud wrestling. The audience was on their feet in anticipation as throws, pins, and skilled escapes were on display. The two were so evenly matched that no one dared predict what the outcome would be. Torrent screamed as Violet ripped out of her hold and scooted away from her attempts to grab her again. She popped up on her arms and swung her legs out in her scissor kick, trying to trip her opponent. But Violet jumped over her legs, then swooped down to entangle the woman. The referee began to count. People believed the match was over. Incredibly, Torrent wriggled loose on the count of 2. Grappling began again until Torrent caught Violet off guard, pinning her face into the mud. Onlookers swore she meant to drown her. But after waiting until the last possible second, she released her. Violet was coughing, choking, and trying to catch her breath when Torrent executed the finale. Violently elbowing Violet in the ribs, she knocked her flat and pinned her. Winded, exhausted, and injured, Violet didn't have the strength to escape. The match was over. The audience held their breath as Violet Crush lay in the middle of the mud, unmoving. Anxiously, Kessa took a step toward the ring. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw medics, led by Green, bringing a stretcher. As they approached, Violet Crush coughed, rolled to her side, and strained to get up. Her dignity would not allow her to leave the ring in a stretcher. The crowd cheered with relief as Violet Crush crawled to her feet. Valiantly, she waved at the audience, shook Torrent's hand, and stepped out of the ring before being whisked away by the medics. Torrent waved arrogantly at her vanquished foe, and then focused her ice-cold, laser-like eyes on Kessa. You'd better beat her, Kane, or I swear I'll have more than words for you afterward, Charlo hissed. It was a dirty way to win, what Torrent had done. Too dirty even for the mud pit. Charlo, like Kessa, appreciated dirt as an accompaniment, not as a mode. They didn't like unscrupulous competitors any more than they liked cheaters. Torrent's victory left everyone with a disturbed feeling. Everyone with an ounce of decency, anyway. Witnessing Cassius smiling smugly to himself while he ogled Torrent, Kessa shivered. The hour respite ticked past slowly for Kessa, who desired nothing more than to show who was really all washed up. Finally, it was time for the final match. Torrent stepped into the ring of mud. Her icy blues trained on Candy Cane like a hunting hound's on a falling duck. No sooner had Candy Cane hopped into the ring than Torrent hammered into her, knocking the wind right out of her as she went down hard. It was a fierce attack designed to hurt or, at the very least, weaken her opponent before the match technically started. The referee sharply reprimanded Torrent, who sneered at Kessa. Unsteadily, Kessa climbed to her feet, barely nodding at the referee to begin the match. Shaking his head, the ref swung his hand, declaring the start of the final round of Mud Mania. Believing that her tactic had worked, Torrent charged the defenseless-looking candy cane, only to discover she'd been duped. At the last second, Kessa sidestepped, lifted her knee, and let the Torrent slam into it. Dropping her knee, she smashed Torrent into the mud and leapt on top of her. The pin lasted only a few seconds as Torrent thrashed around too vehemently to hold for long. Kessa had to tire Torrent out before she could defeat her. Their pursuant grappling stint thrilled the audience so much they didn't know whether to ooh, awe, gasp, cheer, or stay silent. They did all of them. Her arms shaking, Torrent yanked herself away from her opponent. Kessa let her go, noting the arm strength the effort took. Torrent jumped up and kicked Kessa, who'd clambered onto her hands and knees. The kick connected unwittingly with Candy Cane's wound. Growling from the painful impact, Kessa grabbed Torrent's leg and knocked the other one out from under her. She toppled to the ground as Candy Cane tangled her up in a leg lock. Torrent screamed with pain and frustration. Striking Kessa repeatedly with her foot, she managed to escape and slid away from her opponent. Glaring at Kessa, she nursed her sore leg, aware that her adversary could have done far worse. Candy Cane could have broken her leg or twisted her knee. Rather than garnering her opponent's admiration or gratitude, Kessa's compassion only served to infuriate her. With an angry shriek, Torrent leapt to her feet, watching as Candy Cane did likewise. They clashed, Kessa swirling as she threw Torrent back into the mud with her own momentum. The toss rung Torrent's bell, leaving her motionless in the mud for several seconds. Unwilling to end the match just then, as she could have, Kessa circled her rival cautiously. Torrent shook her head, trying to recover her senses. Candy Cane glanced at Cassius, whose fiery blue stare could have burnt holes through a log. Recalling the conversation she'd had with him the previous day, Kessa swore she saw him mouth the order he'd given her then. Throw the competition. Her feelings hadn't changed since she'd first heard the command. She didn't want to let Torrent win. It wasn't right, nor would it be deserved. However, disobeying the king would certainly earn his terrifying wrath, and might even be the straw that broke the spy council's back. Thomas's warnings still rung in her ears. If you place one toe out of line, you're done. But as Charlo had told her, there was many a slip twixt a cup and a lip. It wasn't certain that the council would hear of, or, in this case, care about her disobedience. Even if they did care, the sheer strength of Kessa's feelings in this matter forbade her from throwing the match. She would take whatever consequences that followed, even if it meant the council banned her or the king tortured her. Kessa loved being a spy. She wanted to continue being one, but she was realizing that there were other avenues she could take if things didn't work out with the council. That was if she outlived the ordeal. Now, the question was she willing to die for her conviction? She was distracted from these thoughts when Torrent hooked her legs around Candy Cane's knees and pulled her back into the mud. With a renewed strength, Torrent forced Kessa's face into the muck and held it there, just as she had Violet's. As a spy, Kessa had been trained to hold her breath for long durations, so this didn't affect her as much as it had Violet. But Torrent's ignorance of this was a powerful tool. Kessa let her body go limp, and, right arm cue, Torrent lifted her head, and Kessa presumed she was preparing to pin her and conclude the match. But Torrent didn't execute any hold or pin. She whispered into Kessa's ear, "I wish I could have left your face in the mud until you suffocated, Akaran." She screamed a victory cry as she slid her arm around Kessa's neck, beginning to execute what she believed would be her winning move. She wasn't expecting Candy Cane to have much strength left after being deprived of air, but Kessa had deceived her yet again. Yanking free, Kessa rolled, swinging her legs in an arc that ended up sending Torrent's face into the mud. This time, Kessa didn't hesitate. She straddled her opponent, hooking her arms under the girl's armpits and clasping her hands around the back of her neck. Kessa grunted as she hoisted Torrent's upper body out of the muck and into a powerful and painful hold. Torrent's legs thrashed fruitlessly. Each time she struggled, Kessa tightened her grip and pulled her backward. It was a painful clutch. It was painful to witness, but compassion was not a part of Kessa's strategy this time. The audience went silent, awaiting the outcome of the match with bated breath. It was over. Torrent wouldn't be able to escape this hold, but she had to realize it. Kessa saw the king nearly writhing in his chair with the effort of containing his fury. Fear crept up her spine, almost convincing her to let go, but then she saw Charlo's grin. Violet stood next to her, her violet eyes glittering with satisfaction. Candy Cane felt her resolve solidify. No way would she throw this match. She was willing to jump from the ramparts for this. With a cry that embodied all the exertion, pain, stress, and ambition that Mud Mania produced, Kessa forced Torrent back until she screamed her defeat for the entire crowd to hear. Kessa let go and collapsed into the mud. The referee walked over to grab her arm when Torrent pushed him away. Her face purple with rage, she attacked Kessa, intent on choking her. Although the referee and the medics tried to wrench her away from the victor, her determination proved too strong for them. Torrent ground out through gritted teeth, "No Akaran deserves to win Mud Mania. You'll never wear that crown. Not if I can help it."